Welcome back to the channel, everyone. For today, we're going to discuss one of the most fundamental concepts in Python, which is the function or writing functions. If you've ever wondered if you could simplify your code or have your code be reused in another part of your code, then this video is for you. We'll start first with the simpler concepts of its syntax and then move on to more intermediate and more advanced concepts like the positional arguments, the keyword arguments, and for best practice, how do we create docstrings so that it would be readable and helpful for future users of your function. So let's begin. So first off, what is a function? A function is a block of code written for a specific task. You write it once and you call it whenever you need it. It helps to keep your code clean and dry. Dry for DRY, meaning don't repeat yourself. Let's see how that works. So let's first try to write a simple function that would greet us once we call that function. The syntax in writing a function is as follows. The letters DEF followed by the function name, whatever you want the function to be. So let's say, for example, we want to name it as greet, and it's going to be followed by a parenthesis and then a colon. After the colon, this first line of code, the succeeding lines of code that are indented will tell us what will happen once the function is run. So let's say, for example, for this one, we just wanted to print hello world. So when we call on the greet function, because we named it as greet, this block of code, and if there are other blocks or lines of code below that, would be run. So let's try that. So let's enter this one. Once we've entered this one, it's already in the system. To call that function, we basically just type its name and of course the parenthesis. And you see here printed in your Jupyter notebook the hello world, which was run from this line of code. Let's try this with a much quantitative or numeric example. So let's say, for example, you want to create a function called +1, which takes in a number and after getting that number, adds the value of 1 to that supplied number. Now, to terminate the function, or rather to end the function, we use the return keyword. The return keyword, likewise, is a built-in function, as you could see from the color, and we want to pass back or have this output be returned to the one that called the function. So that's why the return keyword is being used here. So let's see that in action. So let's say, for example, here +1, and let's say I'm going to supply the number 9. So basically what happened here is when we supplied the number 9, the function took that number, added 1, and stored it in a variable called total, and then returned that total variable to the user of that function, or to the one that called the function. So there you go. So now let's talk about positional arguments. Positional arguments are arguments passed in a function in the order that the function parameters are defined. You need to pass them in order or else you might get unexpected results. Let's see that in action. So let's expand the greet function to include a numeric component. So let's say, for example, we have here greet with age. It's a pretty long function name, and we'll define here the name and the age, for example. And here we'll print using the F strings. Okay. Hi, I am. We'll take in the name variable or the name argument supplied, and we'll take here the age variable supplied, and we're done. So to see this in action, let's call the function greet with age. So basically, just copy this one and supply the information of, let's say, Anna. And let's say Anna is 25 years old. And as you could expect, the function returned the appropriate statement where the correct variables or the correct arguments were placed appropriately in the sentence output. But see what happens if we have incorrectly placed these arguments. So let's say, for example, instead of name in the first parameter or the first place, the positional argument, we have supplied the age, and the name has been supplied in the second or as the second positional argument. You'll see that you would create an output that doesn't make sense. So in this particular function, it did not throw us an error. But for the longer functions that you will be creating in your life as a coder or as a programmer, it most likely would throw an error. So as we saw, positional arguments may be a little bit more difficult if you have more than maybe one parameter. So for example, for the two parameters, you have to memorize their position. But if you don't want to worry about the position of your parameters, or you happen to create a function with a lot of parameters or that would need a lot of arguments, then keyword arguments may be the way to go. So let's use this function earlier and turn the positional arguments into keyword arguments. To do that, we would supply a default value to these parameters. So for example, for the name parameter, let's supply the value of Anna, and for the age parameter, let's supply the default value for 25. Doing this, so this one, name and age, are positional parameters or positional arguments, but with this addition, with supplying them with its default value, this now becomes keyword arguments. So in this case, if I call on the function, even without supplying anything, it's reading from the default value. You're basically saying, regardless of the position, or if there has not been any value supplied in this parameter, let the default value be Anna. And for the age one, if there's no value supplied for the age, then let it be 25. Now, we mentioned that the keyword arguments relax the positional order requirement. And to see that in action, for example here, we would, let's say, have a new person, and the age of that new person is 30, and the name of that new person is, let's say, Anthony. As you could see, regardless of whether we defined name first here in the parameters of the function, we can interchange them because we turned them into a keyword argument. Oh, if I haven't mentioned explicitly, the use of keyword arguments such as this one likewise turns them into optional arguments, because as we've seen earlier, even without you supplying any value, the function will still run. And because it has a default value, the arguments of name and age have now become optional arguments. Before we go into Docstrings, let's discuss one of the most common errors new programmers or coders encounter when using both positional and keyword arguments. Essentially, keyword arguments should not be placed after positional argument. The intuition is, because keyword arguments are more flexible, once you start using them, you can't go back to using positional argument. So let's see that in action. To see that error in action, let's use the same function that we have defined a while back and turn this one into, this will remain as a keyword argument, but this time, let's make this into a positional argument. So, positional argument meaning we don't have we don't have a default value here, right? And look at what will happen. This will throw an error. Non-default argument follows a default argument, or basically a non-default argument, the one with optional value, or a keyword argument follows the default argument. So basically, if we want to use both positional arguments and keyword arguments in the same function, all the positional arguments must come first before you have the keyword arguments. Again, let me reiterate, because keyword arguments are much more flexible, once you start using them, the intuition is you cannot go back to having positional arguments, the much stricter one. So to fix this, for example, you really want to use them both, then in this case, let this be the name and make this the keyword argument, and this will still run. So therefore, in this case, note that now name is no longer an optional parameter and you must supply it, but age is an optional parameter because it has a default value. So let's say, for example, it's Joaquin. Okay, so this essentially is the way to go if you want to mix both keywords and optional arguments in the same function. Now, in supplying the value as well in the function, because this function both has the positional argument and the keyword argument, recall earlier that when we were defining everything in terms of keyword arguments, that you can basically jumble the arguments. In this particular case, let's say, for example, you want to change the age to be, let's say, 27. If you want to change the age of it to make it 27, you can no longer do this, right? Because this is okay. That's because the positional argument follows the keyword argument. But let's say, for example, we will define a function and there's a positional argument here, and then let's say, for example, let's create a course parameter, and the course is, let's say, economics. Okay, and we'll put in here I am taking, or let's say I have taken up. Here we put in the course. Okay, so in this case, since we have two keyword arguments here, and maybe let's just name this with age and course. Okay, it's really imperative that the positional arguments must be supplied before the keywords argument. So let's say, for example, here, let's make this Joaquin. But the keyword arguments can now be jumbled amongst themselves. So let's say, for example, here, I can supply the course to be mathematics, and the age to be 27. So the final takeaway is, in both the creation of a function and in calling out a function with both positional and keyword arguments, the positional arguments should be defined and supplied first before the keyword arguments. Now let's move on to something quite useful. Let's discuss docstrings. A docstring is a string literal that is used to describe what a function does. It helps other users and your future self to understand what the function hopes to accomplish, what its parameters are, and its other internal workings. So let's use this greet with age course function. It's basically get this one and put in this function a docstring. So okay, so docstrings are placed right after the first line of the function definition. So after this one, the next line would be docstrings if you intend to put in docstrings. Now, to put in docstrings, you need to place in 3 quotes, either single quotes or double quotes. So for this case, let's use a single quotes 1, 2, 3, and then after that you can now separate the 3 quotes And inside those three codes will be the content of your docstrings. So let's say in this case, we want to let the users know that this function greets the user with the age and course information. After this, you want to inform them the parameters that are used in this function. So here we have the name, end of string type here, and we'll define what this parameter is. It's the user's name, and in this case, let's say we have the age, which is an integer type. Now, in this case where we have a default value of 30, of course, other than supplying the user's age, we would also indicate here that the default value is 30. Okay, so bear in mind that if you've used a keyword argument or a default argument, as we've seen earlier, then in the docstring, if you've placed one but it's best practice to put one, you should also let the users know that and incorporate that in your docstrings. And finally, we have here the course, which is essentially same as well, the first parameter, which is a string in college. Now, because we're not returning anything and we haven't used the keyword return, then we won't have a return value here. But if we do, then usually here we would place what the function is returning. And we'll try that in the second docstring that we will be creating later, which is from the +1 function that we have created earlier. Having placed this docstring, you can now call on the help function with this particular function, and the documentation that will be pulled up is the docstring that you have just created. So as you can see, this is quite helpful if your function is very long, or if you've written that function quite a long time ago because you're dealing with multiple functions every day, every week, or every month. Then this is one way for you to ensure that you're helping others and your future self use it. Now, let's add or create one for this function, for the def +1, or maybe just put it here. To start creating, we put in 3 codes, 1, 2, 3, and then you can now break that 3 codes apart and start to write here. So adds 1 to the supplied number, and we have here as well parameter. I usually want to design it this way as well. If you're comfortable with that, you can put that as well. And here the number, which is an int. And because we have a return here, I would place a return portion, and usually we have the same number of line here if you want, and just put in here what we return, which is the total, which is an int. Okay, now if we enter this, commit that to memory, and call on the help on the +1, we'll get this docstring. You can likewise call on the help function by adding a question mark to the after the function, so it's basically the same one. Okay, so hope this helps. And that's it for this video. We've covered a lot of concepts from the syntax of function, the positional arguments, the keyword arguments, the default arguments, the common errors, and even docstrings. Functions are incredibly useful as they help maintain your code a lot easier because of their usability and their ability to organize your code together. So till the next video, bye now.